The courtroom air was thick, not just with the stale scent of polished wood and old coffee, but with the weight of everything I'd been carrying for months. My hands rested on the table, fingers laced tight to keep them from trembling. Across from me, Daniel sat with his lawyer, his face a mask of calm I used to mistake for strength. I could still see the man I married in him. Clean cut, sharp jaw, that easy charisma that won over every room. But now I saw the cracks. The way his eyes darted to the side when the judge spoke. The way his fingers tapped a nervous rhythm on his knee. He wasn't here to fight for me. He was here to untangle himself, to walk away clean. I never thought my marriage would end in a courtroom. 10 years ago, I'd stood in a sunlit garden, my auburn hair catching the breeze, my green eyes locked on Daniel as I promised him forever. I'd believed in us, in the life we were building. First in our tiny downtown LA apartment with its creaky floors, then in the sleek house in the hills we'd bought when his career took off. I'd been a marketing executive back then, sharp and ambitious, but I'd stepped back to let him shine. I planned dinners for his clients, proofread his proposals, stayed up late listening to his dreams. I thought we were a team, now, as the judge droned on about asset division. I felt the sting of Sophie's name, unspoken but heavy in the room. She wasn't here, of course. She was probably back at their new apartment, posting curated photos of her morning smoothie bowl, captioned with something vague about new beginnings. I'd seen the posts, Daniel's hand resting on her knee in one, their laughter caught mid-frame in another. Each one was a knife, twisting deeper because they weren't just betraying me. They were rewriting our story, pretending our marriage had ended peacefully, before they just happened to fall in love. The truth wasn't peaceful. 6 months ago, Daniel had sat me down in our kitchen, the one I'd painted sage green because he said it felt calming. His voice was steady, practiced, as he said he was conflicted. I'd laughed at first, thinking it was a bad day at work, a midlife crisis, anything but what came next. "It's Sophie," he'd said, and my stomach dropped. Sophie Lane, the bright-eyed 25-year-old from his company's marketing team, the one who'd linger after meetings, laughing too loud at his jokes. I'd met her at a company barbecue, her blonde hair catching the sun, her smile too eager. I'd thought she was harmless. I was wrong. I didn't mean for this to happen, he'd said, his eyes avoiding mine. But it's real, Claire. I'm in love with her. The words landed like a physical blow, stealing my breath. I remember the cold edge of the counter under my palms, the hum of the fridge in the silence. I didn't cry then. I just nodded, numb, and watched him pack a bag and leave. That night, I sat on our patio, staring at the city lights sprawling below, wondering how I'd missed the signs. Had he always been this selfish, or had I just not wanted to see it? The months that followed were a blur of survival. I moved out, renting a small apartment in Silver Lake with bare walls and a view of a noisy street. I'd wake up at dawn, the weight of betrayal pressing on my chest, and force myself through the motions: coffee, emails, long walks to nowhere. I stopped checking social media after I saw their first post together. Daniel and Sophie at a rooftop bar, her arm looped through his, the caption reading, "Chasing New Horizons." The wellness brand they were working for retweeted it, praising their dynamic energy. I threw my phone across the room that day, the screen cracking like my heart. I'd always been strong, the kind of woman who could pitch a campaign to a room full of suits without blinking. But this broke me in ways I didn't expect. I'd catch myself staring at old photos, us at the beach, his arm around me, my laugh caught mid-frame. I'd remember my mom's voice years ago over a cup of tea in her kitchen. "Don't ever lose yourself in a man, Claire. You're enough on your own." I hadn't listened. I'd poured myself into Daniel, and now I was empty yacht. It was a Tuesday in late spring when everything shifted. I was at a coffee shop in Echo Park, the kind with mismatched chairs and too many plants, trying to distract myself with a book I wasn't reading. My hair was pulled back, my face bare, my eyes still carrying the weight of sleepless nights. That's when Vanessa Grant walked in. I hadn't seen her in years, not since I'd freelanced for her wellness brand before I stepped back for Daniel. She was older now, her dark hair streaked with silver, but her presence still commanded the room. She spotted me, hesitated, then walked over. "Claire Morrison?" she asked, her voice warm but curious. "Is that you?" I forced a smile, embarrassed by how I must have looked. Grief-worn, a shadow of the woman she'd known. "Yeah, it's me. Just keeping it low-key these days." She sat down without asking, her eyes sharp but kind. You don't look low key. You look like you're carrying the world. I laughed, a bitter sound. And before I knew it, I was telling her everything. The affair, the divorce, the way Daniel and Sophie had turned their betrayal into a public performance. Vanessa listened, her coffee untouched, her gaze steady. When I finished, she leaned back, her fingers tapping the table. You're exactly what my brand needs, she said. Authenticity. I blinked, caught off guard. What? We're relaunching, she said. New campaign, new focus, real women, real stories. Not the polished Instagram kind, women who've been through something and come out stronger. You, Claire, you've got that fire in you, even if you don't see it right now. I wanted to laugh it off, to tell her I was nobody's poster child. But something in her voice, in the way she saw me, sparked a memory. Me at 25, pitching my first big campaign, feeling unstoppable. I'd lost that woman somewhere along the way. Maybe this was a chance to find her. Vanessa didn't push. She just slid her card across the table. Think about it, auditions next week. No pressure, but I know you'd kill it. That night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror staring at myself. My auburn hair was dull, my green eyes tired, but there was something else there, a flicker of defiance. I thought of my dad, years ago, fixing his old truck in the driveway, his hands steady as he said, "Life's gonna knock you down, Claire, but you don't stay down, you rebuild." I'd forgotten that too. The audition was in a sleek downtown studio, the kind with floor-to-ceiling windows and air that smelled like ambition. I wore a simple black dress, my hair loose, my nerves raw. Vanessa was there along with a team of execs, their faces unreadable. They asked me to tell my story, not the polished version, but the real one. So I did. I talked about the pain, the betrayal, the way I'd lost myself. I talked about the mornings I didn't want to get out of bed, the nights I cried until I couldn't breathe. And then I talked about the spark Vanessa had seen, the part of me that was still fighting to come back. When I finished, the room was quiet. Vanessa smiled, a small, knowing curve of her lips. That's what I'm talking about, she said. 2 weeks later, I got the call. I was the new face of their campaign, a relaunch built around resilience, strength, and real beauty. The same campaign Daniel and Sophie had been working on for months. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I didn't gloat. I just signed the contract, my hand steady for the first time in months. The next few weeks were a whirlwind, a kind of controlled chaos I hadn't felt since my early days in marketing. Vanessa's team moved fast. Photo shoots, video interviews, strategy meetings in glass-walled offices overlooking the city. I'd walk into those spaces feeling like an imposter, my heart pounding as I sat across from stylists and creative directors who tossed around words like brand narrative and emotional resonance. But every time I doubted myself, Vanessa would catch my eye, her nod subtle but firm, like she was saying, "You belong here." And slowly, I started to believe her. The campaign was called Unbroken, a word that felt too big for me at first. I'd spent months feeling shattered, piecing myself back together with coffee-stained journals and long talks with my old friend Liam Brooks. Liam had been my colleague back when I was climbing the marketing ladder, a lanky guy with a quick laugh and a knack for seeing through corporate nonsense. He'd been the one to call me after the divorce papers came through, his voice steady on the phone. "You're not done, Claire. Don't let this define you." He'd show up at my apartment with takeout, sit on my couch, and listen as I unraveled, never pushing, just there. When I told him about the campaign, he grinned, his eyes crinkling. "About damn time you reminded the world who you are." The first shoot was in a studio in Hollywood, the kind of place where the lights are so bright they make your skin feel transparent. I stood in front of a white backdrop, my auburn hair swept over one shoulder, my green eyes catching the light. The photographer, a quiet woman with a shaved head and a gentle voice, kept saying, "Just be you, Claire. That's enough." I didn't know what that meant at first. Be me? The me who'd spent months crying in the dark, or the me who used to command boardrooms? I settled somewhere in between, letting my shoulders relax, my gaze steady. When they showed me the test shots, I barely recognized myself, not because of the makeup or the lighting, but because of the strength in my eyes. It was like seeing the woman I'd forgotten how to be. Between takes. I'd sip lukewarm coffee from a paper cup, my hands steady now, and think about the past. I remembered a summer when I was 10, running through my parents' backyard in Pasadena, the grass tickling my bare feet. My mom had been planting roses, her hands covered in dirt, and she'd looked up at me and said, "You're going to be a force, Claire. Don't ever let anyone dim your light." I'd laughed, not understanding, but that memory hit me hard now. I'd let Daniel dim my light, not because he asked me to, but because I thought that's what love was, making space for someone else, even if it meant shrinking yourself. The campaign grew bigger than I'd expected. Billboards started going up across LA, my face larger than life under bold white letters, unbroken, strength in every story. I'd drive past them on my way to the studio, my heart catching in my throat. There I was on Sunset Boulevard, my eyes steady, my smile soft but resolute. I wasn't just a face, I was a story. The story Vanessa had wanted to tell. Women who'd been through hell and come out stronger. Women who didn't need to shout to be heard. I didn't tell anyone about the campaign at first, not even Liam. I wanted to keep it mine, something Daniel and Sophie couldn't touch. But I knew they'd find out eventually. They were still working for the same brand, still posting their polished photos, their captions dripping with fake sincerity. I'd stopped looking at their posts, but Liam would fill me in sometimes, his voice dry. They're calling themselves a power couple now. It's pathetic. I'd laugh, but it still stung. Not because I wanted Daniel back, but because their happiness felt like a theft, like they'd taken something I'd built and claimed it as their own. The turning point came at a team meeting, one of those endless sessions where everyone's trying to sound smarter than they are. Vanessa was there, her presence commanding as always, but she was quieter than usual, letting her creative director run the show. They were discussing the campaign's launch event, a big red carpet affair at a downtown hotel, the kind of thing LA does best. I was there to review the final video, a 2-minute piece that wove my story with others, all of us women who'd faced loss, betrayal, or failure and kept going. I sat in the back, my hands folded in my lap, watching the screen. My voice came through, soft but steady, talking about the moment I realized I could rebuild. I hadn't expected to cry, but when the video ended, my cheeks were wet. After the meeting, Vanessa pulled me aside. We stood by a window, the city sprawling below us, all glass and light and ambition. "You know, Daniel and Sophie were pitching for this campaign, right?" she said, her voice low. I nodded, my throat tight. I'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed was like a punch. "They thought they had it in the bag," she continued, her eyes glinting. "But when I saw you in that coffee shop, I knew you were the real deal. They're out. You're in." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to laugh, to savor the irony, but another part just felt heavy. Not sad exactly, but aware of how much I'd lost to get here. I thanked her, my voice quiet, and she squeezed my shoulder. "You're not just winning this, Claire, you're rewriting it." That night, I went to dinner with Liam at a little Italian place in Silver Lake, the kind with checkered tablecloths and candles that flickered in the breeze. He raised his wine glass, his grin wide. "To Claire Morrison, kicking ass and taking names." I laughed, clinking my glass against his, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept thinking about Vanessa's words, about rewriting my story. I'd spent so long defining myself through Daniel, his wife, his partner, his support. Now I was just Claire, and maybe that was enough. The launch event was a week away, and I could feel the anticipation building like a storm gathering on the horizon. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling of my apartment, the streetlights casting shadows through the blinds. I'd think about Daniel and Sophie, about the way they'd looked at that company barbecue, her hand on his arm, his smile too bright. I'd think about the courtroom, the way his eyes wouldn't meet mine. And then I'd think about the billboards, my face staring down at the city, and I'd feel something new. A quiet, burning strength. The day of the event, I stood in my apartment, staring at the gown Vanessa's team had sent over. It was deep emerald, sleek but not flashy, the kind of dress that made you feel like you could walk through fire. I slipped it on, my hands steady now, and looked in the mirror. My hair fell in soft waves, my eyes bright with something I hadn't seen in months, hope. I thought of my dad again, his hands greasy from working on that truck, his voice steady. "You rebuild, Claire." And I had. The hotel ballroom was a sea of lights and cameras, the air thick with perfume and ambition. I stepped onto the red carpet, my heart pounding but my smile steady. The crowd was a blur: reporters, influencers, industry types in sharp suits and glittering dresses. Vanessa was there, her presence a quiet anchor, and she gave me a nod as I took my place for the photos. The campaign video played on a massive screen behind me, my voice filling the room, and I felt the weight of every eye on me, not judging, but seeing. Really seeing Dot. And then I saw them. Daniel and Sophie, off to the side, half hidden in the crowd. His face was tight, her smile forced. They weren't part of this anymore, and they knew it. I didn't look away, but I didn't linger either. I just stood taller, my chin lifted, and turned back to the cameras. Dot. My phone buzzed in my clutch as I stepped off the carpet. I slipped into a quiet corner, the noise of the event fading, and checked the message. It was from another major brand, one even bigger than Vanessa's. They'd seen the billboards, the video, the buzz. They wanted me for their next campaign, a global one. I stared at the screen, my breath catching, and then I smiled. Dot. The comeback, it turned out, was just getting started. The afterglow of the launch event lingered like the warmth of a fading sunset. I stood in that quiet corner of the ballroom, my phone still in my hand, the message from the new brand glowing on the screen. A global campaign. The words felt surreal, like they belonged to someone else's life. I slipped the phone back into my clutch, my fingers brushing the smooth satin lining, and took a deep breath. The air smelled of champagne and expensive perfume, but beneath it, I caught a faint whiff of the city outside, exhaust and possibility. I wasn't sure what to do with this moment, this sudden expansion of my world. So I did what I'd been doing for months. I kept moving forward. Dot. The rest of the night was a blur of handshakes and compliments, people I didn't know telling me how inspiring I was, how my story resonated. I smiled, nodded, said the right things, but inside I was still processing. I kept seeing Daniel and Sophie's faces in the crowd, their expressions frozen, in a mix of shock and something else. Envy, maybe, or regret. I didn't want to care what they felt, but I did. Not because I loved him anymore, but because their presence reminded me of how small I'd felt for so long. Standing there in my emerald gown, my hair catching the light, I felt a quiet victory. Not loud or vengeful, but steady. Like a heartbeat. Dot. Vanessa found me later, her silver-streaked hair gleaming under the chandeliers. She handed me a glass of wine, her eyes sharp but warm. "You did good tonight, Claire," she said, her voice low enough that it felt like a secret between us. "This is just the beginning, you know that, right?" I nodded, sipping the wine, its tartness grounding me. "I'm starting to believe it," I said. And she smiled, a rare, genuine smile that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. Dot. When I got home that night, my apartment felt different. The bare walls, the creaky floorboards, the hum of the street outside. They weren't just a place to hide anymore, they were mine. I kicked off my heels, the cool tile soothing my feet, and stood by the window watching the city pulse below. I thought about my mom again, her hands in the dirt, her voice steady. "You're going to be a force, Claire." For the first time in months, I believed her. Dot. The weeks that followed were relentless. Vanessa's campaign was a hit. Social media buzzed with hashtags like #unbroken and #realstrength, and my face was everywhere. I'd walk into coffee shops and see people glance up, their eyes lingering like they recognized me but weren't sure why. I'd catch my reflection in store windows, my auburn hair brighter now, my posture straighter. I was becoming someone new. Or maybe I was just remembering who I'd always been. Dot. As it wasn't all triumph. There were mornings when I'd wake up with a hollow ache in my chest, the kind that didn't have a name. I'd sit at my kitchen table, my coffee going cold, and wonder if I'd ever trust anyone again. Liam noticed it during one of our dinners, his fork pausing midair as he studied me. "You're doing amazing, Claire," he said, his voice soft. "But you don't have to be okay all the time. You know that, right?" I nodded, my throat tight. "It's just, I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, like this is too good, you know?" He leaned back, his eyes kind but serious. "You've earned this. Don't let that bastard make you doubt it." Liam was right, but it was hard to shake the fear. I'd spent so long building my life around Daniel, believing in his promises, that I'd forgotten how to trust my own strength. I'd lie awake at night, the city lights flickering through my blinds, and think about the moment he'd told me about Sophie. The way his voice had been so calm, so detached, like he was discussing a business deal. I'd replay it, searching for clues I'd missed. wondering if I could have changed things. But then I'd think of the billboards, the campaign, the message on my phone, and I'd remind myself I wasn't that woman anymore. The new campaign offer came at the perfect time. It was from a global skincare brand, one known for its sleek ads and massive reach. They wanted me to be their ambassador, not just a face, but a voice, someone to tell stories of resilience and self love to women across the world. I met with their team in a high rise in Century City, the kind of place where the elevators hum quietly and the views make you feel like you're floating above the city. The creative director, a woman named Elena with sharp cheekbones and a warm smile, leaned across the table and said, "We saw your work with Unbroken. You're not just a model, Claire. You're a movement." I laughed, embarrassed, but she didn't. She meant it. They wanted me to travel New York, Paris, Tokyo for shoots and events, to share my story on a bigger stage. I signed the contract that day, my hand steady, my heart racing. It wasn't just about the money or the exposure. It was about claiming something bigger than the pain Daniel and Sophie had left me with. Dot. But there was a twist I hadn't seen coming. A week after I signed, I got a call from Vanessa. She asked me to meet her at the same Echo Park coffee shop where we'd reconnected. When I walked in, she was already there, her hands wrapped around a mug, her expression unreadable. I slid into the seat across from her, my stomach nodding. "What's up?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. "Daniel reached out to me," she said, and my heart stopped. "He's been trying to pitch himself and Sophie for another campaign. Same brand, different angle. He doesn't know you're with us, but he's pushing hard. Says he's got insider insight from working on Unbroken." I felt the air leave my lungs. Of course he was. Daniel. Always chasing the next opportunity, always thinking he could charm his way to the top. I could picture him in his tailored suit, his smile practiced, Sophie at his side with her eager laugh. The thought made my skin crawl, not because I was jealous, but because he was still trying to take what was mine. "What did you tell him?" I asked, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. Vanessa's lips curved into a small, fierce smile. "I told him the campaign's closed, and that we've already got our star." I exhaled, relief washing over me, but it was tinged with something else, anger maybe, or resolve. I didn't want to just win. I wanted to build something so big, so undeniable, that Daniel and Sophie would have to live in its shadow. Not out of spite, but because I deserved it, because I'd earned it. That night, I called Liam and told him everything. He listened, his silence warm and steady, and when I finished, he said, "You're not just beating them, Claire. You're leaving them behind." He was right. The next day, I threw myself into the new campaign. The first shoot was in a park in Griffith Observatory, the city sprawling below, the sky bruised with dusk. I stood on a hill, the wind catching my hair, and told my story again. This time for a camera crew from New York. I talked about the pain, the rebuilding, the way I'd learned to love myself again. I talked about my mom's roses, my dad's truck, the way their voices still guided me. When we wrapped, the director hugged me, her eyes shining. "You're going to change lives, Claire," she said. I didn't know if she was right, but I wanted to believe her. I drove home that night, the city lights blurring through my windshield, and felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just about the campaign anymore, or even about Daniel and Sophie. It was about me, about the woman I was becoming, the one who'd been there all along, waiting for me to find her. As I pulled into my parking spot, my phone buzzed again. Another message from the skincare brand, confirming my first international shoot in Paris. I sat there, the engine still ticking, and let the weight of it sink in. Paris. A new beginning. A life I'd never imagined when I was sitting in that courtroom, my hands trembling, my heart breaking. I stepped out of the car, the night air cool against my skin, and looked up at the stars. They were faint, drowned out by the city's glow, but they were there. Just like me. The plane to Paris felt like a portal to another life. I sat by the window, the hum of the engine steady beneath me, and watched the clouds drift past, their edges glowing gold in the morning light. My hands rested on my lap, no longer trembling, but my heart was racing. Not with fear, but with something else. Anticipation, maybe, or the weight of possibility. I'd packed light, just a carry-on with a few outfits in my journal, its pages filled with scribbled thoughts from the past few months. I hadn't written much since the campaign started, but now, 30,000 feet above the ocean, I felt the urge to put words to this moment. I didn't. Instead, I closed my eyes and let myself feel it. The quiet thrill of leaving LA behind, of stepping into something bigger than I'd ever dared to dream. Paris was a blur of color and sound. The shoot was at a chateau just outside the city, its stone walls weathered by centuries, its gardens blooming with lavender and roses. The air smelled different here, cleaner, softer, like it carried the weight of history. I stood in a courtyard, the cobblestones cool under my bare feet, wearing a flowing white dress that caught the breeze. The camera crew moved around me, their voices a soft hum in French and English, but I barely noticed them. I was lost in the moment, in the way the light filtered through the trees, in the way my own voice sounded when I spoke for the camera. Steady, sure, like it belonged. The skincare brand's campaign was called Radiance Within, a name that felt both too grand and exactly right. They wanted me to talk about self-love, about finding beauty in the scars life leaves behind. I thought of the nights I'd spent alone in my Silver Lake apartment, the mirror reflecting a woman I didn't recognize. I thought of the courtroom, the way Daniel's eyes had avoided mine. And then I thought of the billboards, the red carpet, the message on my phone. I told that story, not the polished version, but the raw one. The crew listened, their faces soft. And when we wrapped, the director, a wiry man with a thick accent, clasped my hands and said, "You make us believe, Claire." That night, I sat in my hotel room, the windows open to the Paris skyline. The Eiffel Tower glowed in the distance, its light steady against the dark. I sipped a glass of wine, the glass cool against my lips, and thought about how far I'd come. A year ago, I'd been sitting in that sage green kitchen, listening to Daniel tell me he loved someone else. Now I was here, in a city I'd only dreamed of, building a life I hadn't known I could have. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when the pain crept in, sharp and uninvited, but it was mine. I thought about my dad, too, his hand steady on that old truck, his voice calm as he told me to rebuild. I'd always thought rebuilding meant fixing what was broken, putting the pieces back exactly as they were, but now I saw it differently. Rebuilding meant creating something new, something stronger. I wasn't trying to be the Claire who'd married Daniel, or even the Claire who'd pitched campaigns in boardrooms. I was becoming someone else, someone who could stand in a Paris courtyard and feel the sun on her face without apologizing for taking up space. The next day, I met Elena, the creative director, for coffee in a little cafe near the Seine. The air smelled of fresh bread and river water, and the tables were crowded with people laughing, arguing, living. Elena leaned back in her chair, her sharp cheekbones catching the light, and said, "You're a natural, Claire." "But you know that, don't you?" I laughed, stirring my coffee, the spoon clinking softly against the cup. "I'm still getting used to it," I admitted. "This all feels big. Too big, sometimes." She nodded, her eyes warm but serious. "That's how you know it's real. The big things always feel like they might swallow you whole. But you're not drowning, are you?" I shook my head, my throat tight. "Not anymore." We talked for hours, about the campaign, about life, about the way women are expected to shrink themselves to fit other people's stories. Elena had her own scars. A divorce, a career setback, a daughter she'd raised alone. She didn't share them like they were wounds, but like they were medals, proof of survival. I wanted to carry my own story like that, not as a weight, but as a strength. When I got back to LA, the city felt different. The air was heavier, the light harsher, but I saw it with new eyes. I'd walk past the billboards, my billboards, and feel a quiet pride, not just in the image, but in what it meant. Women were messaging me now, strangers who'd seen the campaign, who'd heard my story. They'd tell me about their own betrayals, their own comebacks, their own moments of standing taller. I'd read their words on my phone, sitting on my couch with a cup of tea, and feel a connection I hadn't expected. I wasn't just telling my story anymore, I was part of theirs. Liam noticed the change in me too. We met for brunch one Sunday, at a place in Venice with wobbly tables and strong coffee. He leaned back, his sunglasses perched on his head, and said, "You're different, Claire. Not just the campaign stuff, you're lighter." I smiled, cutting into my pancakes, the syrup pooling on the plate. "I feel it," I said. "It's like I'm finally letting go." He nodded, his eyes crinkling. "Good, you deserve that." But letting go wasn't simple. There were still moments when I'd see something, A photo of Daniel and me tucked in an old book, the scent of his cologne on a stranger in a crowd, and the pain would hit, sharp and sudden. I didn't love him anymore, but I mourned the life I'd thought we'd have. The house in the hills, the late night talks, the promises we'd made. I'd sit on my balcony, the city lights sprawling below, and let myself feel it. Not because I was stuck, but because I was human. The twist came a few weeks later at a follow up meeting with Vanessa's team. We were in their downtown office, the one with the floor to ceiling windows, going over the campaign's metrics, views, shares, engagement. The numbers were staggering, but I barely heard them. My eyes kept drifting to the window, to the way the sunlight caught the dust in the air, making it shimmer. Vanessa was talking, her voice steady, when she mentioned something that made my heart stop. "We got a letter," she said, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. "From Sophie." I froze, my hands tightening around my water glass. "What kind of letter?" Vanessa slid a piece of paper across the table. "She sent it to the brand's general inbox, says she wants to meet with you. Alone." I stared at the paper, my pulse loud in my ears. Sophie. The woman who'd laughed too loud at Daniel's jokes, who'd posted those photos with him, who'd stepped into my life like it was hers to take. I hadn't seen her since the launch event, hadn't spoken to her since before the affair came to light. The thought of facing her now, after everything, made my stomach twist. "What does she want?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Vanessa shrugged, but her eyes were watchful. "She didn't say, just that she needs to talk. Could be nothing, could be something." I took the letter home unread and left it on my kitchen table. For 2 days, it sat there, a silent wait. I'd walk past it, my eyes catching on the neat handwriting, and feel a mix of dread and curiosity. What could she possibly have to say? An apology? A justification? Or worse, some new way to twist the knife? On the third day, I sat down with a cup of coffee, the morning light slanting through my window, and opened it. Her words were careful, measured, but they hit me like a wave. She wrote about guilt, about realizing too late what she'd done. She didn't ask for forgiveness, but she asked to meet, to explain. "I see you now," she wrote. "I see what I took from you. I need you to know I didn't understand then." I put the letter down, my hands shaking, and stared out the window. The city was waking up, cars humming, birds calling. I didn't owe her anything, not my time, not my understanding. But something in her words, in their rawness, made me pause. Maybe it was the woman I was becoming, the one who could stand in a Paris courtyard and feel the sun. Maybe it was my mom's voice telling me to be a force. Or maybe it was just me, tired of carrying the weight of their choices. I hadn't decided yet if I'd meet her, but I knew one thing. Whatever I chose, it would be for me, not for her, not for Daniel, not for the story anyone else wanted to tell, just for Claire. The coffee in my mug had gone cold, but I didn't move from the kitchen table. Sophie's letter lay open in front of me, its edges curling slightly in the morning light. Her words echoed in my mind, not because they were profound, but because they were honest in a way I hadn't expected. "I see you now," she'd written. I didn't know if that was true or if it even mattered. What mattered was the choice in front of me: meet her, hear her out, or let her fade into the background of my life like a song I no longer needed to hear. I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking under me, and stared out the window at the Silver Lake street below. A jogger passed by, her ponytail swinging, and a delivery truck rumbled to a stop. Life kept moving, and so would I. I didn't decide right away. For days, I carried the letter in my mind like a stone in my pocket, heavy but not unbearable. I'd catch myself thinking about it during shoots, my hands smoothing the fabric of a dress as the camera clicked, or during quiet moments with Liam, his voice pulling me back to the present with a joke or a question. I didn't tell him about the letter at first. It felt too personal, too raw, like something I needed to untangle alone. But one evening, as we sat on my balcony with a bottle of wine and the city lights stretching out below, I let it slip. "She wants to meet," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The wine glass was cool in my hand, the air warm against my skin. "Sophie. She sent a letter to Vanessa's team, asking to talk to me." Liam's eyebrows shot up, but he didn't say anything right away. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and studied me. "What do you want to do?" he asked finally, his tone careful, like he was holding space for whatever I'd say. I sighed, swirling the wine in my glass, watching the light catch its edges. I don't know, part of me wants to ignore it, to keep moving forward, but another part, I don't know, Liam. Maybe I need to hear her out, not for her, but for me. He nodded, his eyes steady. You've already come so far, Claire. Whatever you choose, it's not about her. It's about what you need to close this chapter. Close this chapter. The words stuck with me. I'd spent so long running from the pain of Daniel and Sophie's betrayal, then fighting to reclaim my life through the campaigns, the billboards, the trips to Paris. But closing the chapter? That felt different. It wasn't about winning or proving anything. It was about letting go. Not just of them, but of the version of myself that had been defined by their choices. I decided to meet her, not because I owed her anything, but because I wanted to face the last piece of this story head on. I chose a neutral place, a small cafe in Los Feliz with outdoor tables and a view of the hills. I arrived early, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea, the steam rising in soft curls. The air smelled of eucalyptus and fresh bread, and the morning was quiet, save for the hum of traffic and the chatter of a couple at a nearby table. I wore a simple sweater and jeans, my auburn hair loose, my green eyes calm but watchful. I didn't want to look like the woman from the billboards. I wanted to be Claire, just Claire Dot. When Sophie walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. Her blonde hair was pulled back, her face bare of the makeup she'd worn like armor in those Instagram posts. She looked younger, smaller, her bright eyes dulled by something heavy. Guilt, maybe, or exhaustion. She spotted me and hesitated, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her bag, then walked over and sat down. The chair scraped against the pavement, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Thanks for meeting me, she said finally, her voice softer than I remembered. I didn't think you would, I nodded, my fingers tightening around my cup. I almost didn't, but I figured I wanted to hear what you have to say. She looked down at her hands, her nails unpainted, chipped at the edges. I don't know where to start, she said, and I could hear the tremor in her voice. I didn't mean to hurt you, Claire. I know that sounds hollow now, but I didn't understand what I was doing. I was caught up in him, in the idea of him. I thought it was love. I felt a pang not of anger, but of something sadder, older. I remembered feeling that way about Daniel, too. The way his charm could make you feel like the only person in the room. I waited, letting her words settle, letting the silence stretch. I saw your campaign, she went on, her eyes flicking up to meet mine, then dropping again. The billboards, the videos, you're incredible. And I realized how much I took from you, not just Daniel, but your light. I saw it at the launch event, the way you stood there, so strong. I envied it, and I hated myself for it. Her words hit me, not because they were surprising, but because they were so raw. I'd expected excuses, defensiveness, maybe even blame. But this was something else. A confession, a reckoning. I leaned back, the tea cooling in my hands, and thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, sitting in that courtroom, my heart breaking. I wasn't her anymore. I don't forgive you, I said, my voice steady but not cruel. Not because I'm holding a grudge, but because forgiveness isn't mine to give. You and Daniel made your choices, and I've made mine. I'm not here to absolve you. I'm here to move on. She nodded, her eyes glistening, but she didn't cry. I understand, she said. I needed you to know I see it now. I see you. And I'm sorry. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a young woman who'd been swept up in a story she didn't fully understand. I didn't pity her, but I didn't hate her either. She was just human. Flawed like me, like Daniel, like all of us. I stood up, leaving a few dollars on the table for my tea, and said, Take care, Sophie. I didn't look back as I walked away, Dot. That meeting wasn't the closure I'd expected, but it was the closure I needed. It wasn't about her apology or her guilt. It was about me standing in that moment, choosing myself over the pain. I drove home, the city blurring past, and felt a weight lift. Not all at once, but slowly, like fog burning off in the morning sun. Daniel, I learned later, didn't fare as well. Vanessa told me over coffee that he'd been let go from the company. Not fired outright, but encouraged to pursue other opportunities. His pitches had grown desperate, his charm wearing thin as the brand moved on without him. Sophie, too, had faded from the scene, her Instagram posts less frequent, her bright smile dimmed. I didn't rejoice in their downfall. It wasn't about revenge, it was about the quiet justice of life moving forward, of consequences catching up. They'd built their story on a lie, and lies don't hold up forever. Days. For me, the months that followed were a new chapter. The skincare campaign took me to New York, where I stood in Times Square, my face on a massive screen, the city pulsing around me. Then Tokyo, where the cherry blossoms fell like soft rain, and I spoke to a room full of women about resilience, my voice steady, my heart full. Each trip, each shoot, each message from a stranger who saw themselves in my story, it built something new in me. Not just confidence, but a deep, quiet strength, the kind that comes from knowing you've walked through fire and come out whole. I moved out of the Silver Lake apartment, trading it for a small house in the hills with a garden out back. I planted roses like my mom used to, their petals soft against my fingers as I worked the soil. Liam would come over, bringing wine or bad jokes, and we'd sit on the patio, the city lights below us, talking about nothing and everything. He never pushed, never asked for more than I could give, but I saw the way his eyes lingered sometimes, warm and steady. Maybe one day I'd be ready to let someone in again. For now, it was enough to be Claire. I thought about my parents often, their voices a quiet guide. My dad's steady hands, my mom's fierce love. They'd given me the tools to rebuild, even if I hadn't known it at the time. I'd carry their lessons with me, not as weight, but as light, illuminating the path ahead. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, I stood in my garden, the scent of roses heavy in the air. My phone buzzed. A message from Elena confirming another campaign, this one for a women's empowerment initiative. I smiled, my heart steady, and slipped the phone into my pocket. I didn't need to answer right away. I knew where I was going. I turned back to the roses, my fingers brushing their petals, and felt the world settle around me. I was enough.